Tensions between the US and Venezuela have reached a new point, especially since Venezuela has refused to back down despite the differences in military strength. Now, Venezuela has ambushed the US Navy and is facing the full wrath of its power, with President Donald Trump at the helm. What happened after the US Navy was ambushed? And how will Venezuela handle this new conflict? On October 14, 2025, the calm waters of the Caribbean Sea turned into the stage of one of the most shocking military confrontations of the decade. Just 90 nautical miles off the northern coast of Venezuela, the USS Thomas Hudner, a U.S. Navy destroyer patrolling one of the world's most critical maritime routes, came under direct fire. Without warning, the Venezuelan Navy launched three P-800 Onyx hypersonic missiles, each capable of Mach 2.6 speeds and designed to pierce through advanced naval defenses. In mere seconds, two were intercepted, but one struck with devastating precision, tearing through the deck and leaving fire and chaos in its wake. The attack instantly sent shockwaves through Washington, global markets, and diplomatic circles. In the blink of an eye, what had been weeks of tense standoffs and maritime brinkmanship became open hostility. In fact, for weeks before that incident, tensions had been high between the two countries. Venezuela expanded its maritime claims 180 nautical miles beyond internationally recognized limits and asserted that it was defending its sovereignty. The United States didn't see it like that and called the move illegal and provocative, warning Caracas repeatedly to stand down. Each warning was met with silence or defiance. Once the Venezuelan Navy's radar detected the Thomas Hudner operating nearby, there was confusion and communication aboard the command ship, leading to a catastrophic decision that would shake up the balance of power in the Caribbean. As the missile slammed into the American destroyer, the sea around it erupted in flame. 24 sailors were injured, 3 were confirmed dead, and 12 key systems on the ship went offline. Within minutes, distress calls reached the U.S. Naval Command. By 10 a.m., the White House Situation Room was in crisis mode. Senior military leaders, intelligence officials, and President Donald J. Trump gathered under tight security. They suspected that the attack was deliberate. That's when they came up with Operation Freedom Thunder. It was a strategic and precise counterstrike aimed at what Washington was calling an act of war. Intelligence gathered by U.S. agencies revealed something even darker behind the aggression. Intercepted communications and satellite imagery pointed to a sprawling Venezuelan network trafficking cocaine and weapons into the United States under the guise of humanitarian aid. This became a national security issue and not a simple regional dispute. So, the U.S. didn't want to retaliate, but wanted to cut off what they were calling a covert infiltration operation. By 5:17 p.m., the orders were signed. From Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, two B-52H Stratofortress bombers roared into the sky, escorted by F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters and an EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft. Their destination was the Venezuelan capital of Caracas. Their mission was to disable the nerve center of Venezuela's government. Flying high above the clouds, refueled midair by a KC-135 tanker, the bombers crossed the Caribbean under radio silence. As dawn broke over Caracas on October 15th, the Venezuelan air defense network went blind. The Growler aircraft unleashed a full-spectrum electronic assault that flooded radar screens with fake aircraft and false returns. In that moment of confusion, the real strike began. At exactly 7:45 a.m., 5 2,000-pound GBU-31 JDAM precision-guided bombs were released from 35,000 feet. Within seconds, they found their target, which was the National Assembly building in the heart of Caracas. The first bomb completely destroyed the central wing, while the second and third damaged the fortified chambers used by senior officials. The last two detonated with the force of a small earthquake. The entire operation, from jamming to impact, lasted less than 7 minutes. Surveillance cameras captured a fireball towering more than 100 feet into the air as steel and concrete rained down upon the capital. By the time the smoke had cleared away, Venezuela's political and military command structure was in disarray. President Nicolas Maduro wasn't in the building during the attack, but many of his top advisors were hospitalized, and the country's central government hub was left in ruins. Power was knocked out across 6 city blocks. Communications between naval and air force divisions collapsed, and confusion spread through the ranks. Within a few hours, 2 senior naval commanders were confirmed dead, and multiple encrypted communication networks were offline. At 1 p.m. Eastern Time, President Trump addressed the nation. Standing before maps of cocaine shipment routes and images of hidden weapons caches, he declared that the United States didn't start the war but stopped the threats. He vowed that American lives and trade routes would never again be targets of foreign aggression. Around the world, the response was immediate. NATO allies voiced their support. 25 countries cut diplomatic ties with Caracas, and insurance rates for ships operating near Venezuelan waters tripled overnight. The global market reeled as oil shipments rerouted thousands of miles to avoid the danger zone, pushing fuel prices in southern Florida up by 11% in just a single day. Meanwhile, inside Venezuela, there was chaos everywhere. The National Assembly had been destroyed, and power outages spread, causing panic to spread around the streets. Protesters filled the plazas of Caracas, demanding answers and accountability from a government that had led them into disaster. Food shortages worsened as disrupted infrastructure choked supply chains, and blackouts plunged major provinces into darkness. As public trust eroded, U.S. drones patrolled silently over the Caribbean as a show of force to reveal who owns the skies. Within 48 hours, the geopolitical landscape of the region had shifted dramatically. The Organization of American States put together an emergency summit to discuss sanctions against Venezuela, while 14 U.S. allies in the Western Hemisphere agreed to organize joint maritime patrols. By October 17th, the sea had grown calm. The confrontation had lasted less than 72 hours, yet its consequences would go on for years. There was no formal war, but the meaning was clear. The U.S. had delivered a devastating lesson in modern warfare, like speed, precision, and control. The Venezuelan strike had been an act of arrogance and miscalculation. In response, Washington demonstrated a message that every government on the planet understood immediately. For Venezuela, the cost of this conflict was immense. Aside from losing their key government building, it lost credibility, leverage, and the trust of its own people. It wanted to display a show of force, but ended up losing more than it was supposed to gain. But this is just the latest news in the conflict between the U.S. and Venezuela. In recent months, the United States has markedly expanded its military footprint in the Caribbean and the waters off Venezuela's coast. It started as counter-narcotics operations, but it has now become a larger posture of deterrence and regional power projection. For instance, the U.S. revived the Cold War-era Roosevelt Roads Naval Station in Puerto Rico, deploying F-35 stealth fighters, transport aircraft, and marine helicopters. It signaled that the Caribbean is now treated as a forward operating zone. By one count, over 10,000 U.S. personnel, 8 warships, a nuclear-powered submarine, P-8 maritime patrol aircraft, and MQ-9 Reaper drones are now active in the region. Naval vessels, such as the USS Lake Erie and other destroyers, have moved into the southern Caribbean, off Venezuelan waters. Washington says that this is part of a broader push to interdict drug trafficking networks that it accuses of operating out of Venezuela and using Caribbean maritime corridors. For instance, U.S. forces have carried out strikes on vessels alleged to be traffickers, and U.S. officials say the increased sea and air presence will improve the ability to monitor go-fast boats, semi-submersibles, and maritime smuggling routes. But from Venezuela's vantage point, the buildup is a direct threat to its sovereignty and a potential prelude to broader intervention. President Nicolas Maduro declared on September 30, 2025, a state of external emergency, placing the armed forces on wartime alert and authorizing broad mobilization in response to what Caracas calls escalating U.S. aggression. The Venezuelan government is also responding with its own military moves. It recruited millions into the Bolivarian militia, deploying additional troops to the Colombian border and coastal states, and launching large-scale military exercises on Venezuela's offshore island of La Orchilla, which involve naval, air, drone, and electronic warfare assets. Now, the scene is set. A U.S. force posture aimed at maritime interdiction and projection of power, and a Venezuelan response that mixes defensive readiness, ideological mobilization, and active public messaging of resistance. One of the flashpoints in this dynamic is how drug trafficking accusations are intertwined with military operations. The U.S. has repeatedly accused senior Venezuelan officials of leading narcotics networks like the Cartel of the Suns, and has also authorized maritime strikes against vessels that are trafficking from Venezuela. Venezuela is still denying any involvement in illegal trafficking and accuses the U.S. of using the drug war as an excuse to infringe on Venezuelan sovereignty. But everyone is wondering what Trump really wants to achieve in Venezuela. The U.S. says it's combating drugs, but the scale of military deployment like carrier groups, submarines, F-35s, and amphibious-ready groups is way more than what is expected for a counter-narcotics operation alone. With how many troops and military resources that are being stationed near Venezuela, it's no surprise that the country is worried that Washington has other objectives, like plans to change Venezuela's regime and deterrence. But the U.S. insists that its mission is limited to law enforcement and border security. On the Venezuelan side, the response has been in different ways. Aside from mobilizing troops and militias, Venezuela has upgraded its air defense posture and coastal maritime forces, with advanced Russian systems being repositioned, submarine and offshore patrols increased, and rules of engagement expanded to allow forceful action against foreign vessels within its claimed maritime zones. Publicly, Maduro and his government are framing the U.S. presence as a hostile incursion, warning the U.S. to stay away from Venezuelan waters and threatening that any attack would meet fierce resistance. Economically and diplomatically, Venezuela is appealing to allies such as Russia and China for support, and preparing for sanctions and isolation scenarios. The region's maritime trade and navigation lanes are part of the strategic calculus. The southern Caribbean, between Venezuela and the neighboring islands, is a vital transit zone for energy shipments, commercial shipping, and migratory flows. A disruption, either intentionally or by accident, between U.S. naval forces, Venezuelan patrols, and traffickers could quickly ripple into wider economic or security shocks. U.S. officials view securing these sea lanes as essential to both hemispheric security and the U.S. southern border strategy. For its part, Venezuela sees U.S. operations near its coast as undermining its territorial integrity and as part of a larger campaign to encircle or isolate it. Where does this leave the U.S. and Venezuela? And what do you think would happen next? Let's know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on global military events.